My name is Ajit Alexander. I work for a company called Oxford Wave Research, and as the name might give it away, we're based out of Oxford, and we do a lot of our work around speaker recognition. This next set of sessions, we have some pretty fantastic talks. We've been working together with a few folks here. Chad Dorsey is going to be talking about learning sciences research on speech and dialogue, and then we'll have Abir, myself, and then Marilyn doing talks as well. So this entire session will be all around speech, speaker, which is about how do you identify who said what, speech is about what they said, and then dialogue generation, which we don't need an introduction to. So without wasting too much more time, we get Chad up here.
Excellent, thanks. It's fun to be here. This is something I've been talking with Yingy and others for a long time about, so it's great to see it finally coming together, and it's excellent to have all the people in the same room thinking about this stuff. So I'm here to start things off a little bit, and I'll say a little bit more about myself in a minute, but I want to give an overview to some of the things that will be coming in the next few talks, and also give a sense of how this all fits into the picture, or potentially fits into the picture of learning sciences research. Speech technologies have come a long way in the last few years in the public consciousness, and they can really seem like magic. When you talk to Alexa, when you talk to Siri, by now, in fact this has changed. I mean, the terminology I used to use was that, well, it seems like it's okay, but not all that great, because it's what we know. It's actually, now it seems like magic. Why are we here? Well, we care about the promise of this for kids, for learning, and for teaching. And when we see technologies like this, we want to think about the ways that they can contribute to that possibility. And there really are some grand possibilities for speech technology in learning research. But I'm here to say that it's not all roses and sunshine. There are a lot of barriers involved. As soon as we start to talk about children and learning and speech technology all in the same sentence. It's worthwhile. I'm here to say this struggle is worthwhile. It's an uphill battle, but we can and should face it. But it's also really interesting. There are times when you can feel like you're plopped down in an alien world when you try to apply the things that seem like they're obvious in speech research to children's speech in naturalistic settings. So I want to unpack that a little bit and help us think about it, because there's promise. If we cross those barriers, there's really something to be had here. And it can take us to places that we haven't been before, some places probably we haven't even imagined before. So it's worth the effort. I'm going to give you just a view into that today. I'm going to give you a little bit of a sense of what's there, give you a little bit of a roadmap to the kinds of things that are possible on the horizon, so that you get a sense of how this all fits together. So just a word about me. I'm not a speech technologist. I play one at workshops, and that's about it. I'm the head of the Concord Consortium. We're an organization in Concord, Massachusetts, and in the Bay Area in California. We've been around just about 25 years, thinking about how technology can transform STEM education. Really thinking in particular about the ways that technologies can add to empowering students for inquiry and enabling them to think in new ways around STEM learning. Lots of people thinking about lots of different kinds of projects. Very few of them, in fact, none of them right now involving speech. The work that we've been doing with speech has been thinking about the possibilities and trying to help move a field forward, or even help a field cohere around these ideas. So the promise of this, as I mentioned, exists, and it's real because speech is the thing that we use for education, essentially. There are very few, if any, educational learning interactions that we can think of where speech is not prominent. In fact, where it's hard to imagine them where it's not really the kind of key fabric that happens in what's going on. Obviously, nonverbal communications, others we're learning about here too, but speech is huge. And we spend a lot of energy in education research thinking about speech and about analysis and the ramifications of it. But there's a lot of work that goes into that, and there's a lot that's missed because of the fact that it's just hard to do. So that's one aspect, but there are also new things that can be opened up, so it's more than just the heart. So there's a lot of promise there. I'll say more about that in a little bit. What I want to do at first, though, is break this down, because I at least find it myself very useful to have kind of a 101 of what goes on. Both because there are a lot of layers there, and those have implications for even who the different groups and dynamics are within speech technologies research, but also because it helps peel back the curtain on the magic that isn't quite so magic in the speech technologies that are happening today as well. So this is the kind of first piece here. There are different parts to the work chain when we're thinking about speech technologies and how your question to Alexa turns into something that comes back to you. And it's useful to think about where those different parts of the work chain are, because it helps us understand the barriers as well as the possibilities for ed research. So the first part is data collection. You've got to get some data in here. And so there's a realm of thinking just about how we collect audio data when we're trying to understand speech research. You can use plain old microphones on people's faces, mouths, heads, etc. That's one way to start to collect reliable data. Even that is not a given. You need to think about the microphones. You need to think about things like sampling rates as you do. You can start to deal with multiple setups. This is from Cynthia D'Angelo's work, which is marvelous stuff on collaboration and speech. This is both to show that you can do it and that it's not a simple thing to try to collect quality audio data across multiple people in a classroom setting or another setting for that matter. There are other kinds of devices and things that are out there. This is one that I think has some real promise. The Lena Foundation has been looking a lot at young children's speech. I think Providence Talks is a project that's been working with this for quite a while with young children, adult interaction. And these devices are actually quite robust and designed to capture audio data from a vest sort of on the child's body. So there are different ways of thinking about capturing speech with particular devices that are oriented toward that. And then there's a lot of other stuff. So the fact that the Amazon Echo hears you while it's playing music from across the room is not to be discounted. There are lots of microphones involved in that. There are things, this beam forming process that can become useful for taking multiple microphones, arranged to short, medium, and long ranges, and fusing them together in ways that can start to capture data from situations that are where it's not easy and clean, or it's not easy to get a clean signal. So those are technologies that are both here and still coming in many ways, but it's important to be aware of those factors when we're thinking about what it means to capture audio data in an environment where learning happens, because it doesn't happen in a situation where two people happen to be sitting in a very quiet room, just talking nicely. So a couple other pieces of the work chain. Once you've got the data, you've got to process it in some way. So the audio pre-processing involves two layers to it. We'll hear more about this in some of the talks coming up. One of these layers is diarization, which means who is talking, essentially. And that involves taking this signal that might have multiple speakers and parsing it out into a signal for speaker A, signal for speaker B, etc. Another one just involves understanding what is speech. So there's lots of noise on the signal. We care about the speech. So detecting the portions that are speech is another element of the chain that's important and not entirely obvious. The diarization, there are algorithms. Error rates can be relatively low. We'll probably hear more about this. This might be an old number, but even in naturalistic settings, you can do pretty well, 15% or so error rate. When you're dealing with detection, that's separating this from the background. Again, this is pretty good by now. You can do large amounts of data pretty well. Error rates, 10%, those are constantly going down as people are working on this. So both of these are pretty robust by now. And all the people here who know more about this than I will be able to correct me on these numbers. But suffice it to say that some of these things, it's pretty decent. When we start to think about the next layers, it becomes more interesting. So we don't always think about the ways that we talk and the things that are involved in them. But when you do, you start to understand both the some of the complexities, but also the interesting possibilities. So think about just general speech signal. What's in a speech signal? There are words. There are words from different people. There is exchange back and forth between those different people. And there are a lot of robust systems by now for dealing with some of those data. You can get counts of words very reliably from data that are relatively messy. You can understand turns back and forth. You can understand the different ways that people are sharing. You can identify keywords relatively well if you have a specific set of keywords that you're looking for. And sentiment and affect, even under high error rates, the signal for speech is still really useful. So one of the key things that comes away as soon as you're an education person starting to get turned on to this notion is, oh my gosh, this is great, I can get an instant transcript of everything. So whoa, okay, that's not that easy. But the next thing that people will say is, don't discount the things that you can get, because the is useful, very useful. And the fact that you might only detect a few words can also be really useful. So all these social signals are pretty robustly detectable. Laughter, filled pauses, unfilled pauses. The detection of overlap speech is pretty reliable. Dealing with overlap speech is a different problem, not necessarily so simple. And stress detection also reliable. Interestingly, lots of these things have come from the applications that have pushed speech research forward. So stress detection is really useful if you're in a cockpit or in the military or what have you, so we have a lot of algorithms for it. A lot of the things that we've done come from that, and we'll see the benefits but problems of that in a minute. This just gives you a sense of the kinds of things that are involved here. You can see that there are overlapping areas of speech that would need to get teased out by individual microphones, but you can think about what this might mean for education already. If you've got a teacher who's talking to students, and you can see the turn taking back and forth, you're getting information that's really useful. If you're trying to understand even total words spoken in a group or total words spoken by one person or another, again, educationally we start to see that those kinds of things can be really useful. And the notion of overlap speech gives you some sense of, it's the equivalent of the hands touching in some ways. People do different kinds of speaking patterns when they're more emotionally engaged with one another. So the other part of this chain of analyzing the signal once we've got the speech parsed out is what's the actual language. And so that lexical analysis piece is the one that is most familiar to people. There's automatic speech recognition, there's keyword spotting. Those pieces are things you can do once you have the speech signal. If it's you can do that no matter what. You may or may not get the most clean signal out of it, that depends. So the question is, what can we do with all of this? Don't forget that when you have multiple things, you can start to put them together. So even then, down the chain, we can start to combine things into ways that provide even more valuable signals from the combination than from the individual. And there might be promise in matching these different combinations to certain problems of interest. So, for example, conversation count plus prosody might be engagement, or overlap speech and speaker diarization and question detection, which you can do pretty well, might give you a sense of, is this a student-centered classroom culture or not? So the combinations of even these things that are not instant audio recognized transcripts could be quite significant signals for education research. So in general, what's the promise for learning? Well, there are some areas where we care a lot about understanding learning, where speech could really shed a light. Understanding collaboration, understanding argumentation and student reasoning. Thinking about teacher questioning and classroom ecology, those pieces are really important for understanding the ways that we bring learning about. And student motivation and engagement, same kind of thing. Just to give you a view down the road, there are a lot of things that I think we haven't thought about. So what would a Fitbit for teaching look like? It would not be hard to be able to pick up some device and tell you how many questions you had asked, or how many words you'd spoken versus students, how many times a student had asked another question of a student versus you. There are a lot of things that could help you understand where you are in the world. Also, the potential for doing data collection in a scalable way is truly there once we start to solve some other problems. You could put a microphone stand in a classroom and gather data without having to go there. So you've got an observer in a box in a lot of ways. And then if you think about putting a microphone in the classroom for 3 weeks and looking for keywords or patterns, all those things open up whole realms of education research we haven't thought about in the past. But there are barriers. So just to make sure I close on the sobering note, it is not a simple thing to take what we have done in speech technologies and apply it to children, because there are lots of things that don't apply from the world where all the speech work has been done for adults. Error rates are really high for automatic speech recognition of speech signals. They're high enough that is problematic. Youth speak differently than adults, both the way that their vocal cords work, they are not fully formed, but also the way that they phrase things. They make up words, they use them in ways that aren't normal. They tumble over one another in the ways that they interact. Those things aren't in the kinds of programs, algorithms, etc. And when there are, there are like 2 sets of people of speech corpora for people doing meetings with overlap speech. That's not much. It's surprisingly not much for noisy settings and situations. And so that's the other piece. When we're in noisy settings, all bets are not entirely off, but lots of them are. So dealing with the noisy classroom setting is a whole other ballgame that we haven't dealt with. So this is an interesting problem, and it's an unsolved problem in many ways. And it's a problematic problem too. A lot of us have been talking about this because the funding hasn't been there, and the funding isn't obviously there. So this is the sort of last piece add here is think about ways that we can hold this promise up, but the ways that we can band together to make this promise possible, because both the field needs to understand this, and even funders need to understand this much better than they do. They think it's a solved problem, and until we get to the point where we start to develop some of these databases, we're going to be stuck behind all of this. But it's worthwhile to look into this. New things are coming all the time. Google's releasing stuff like crazy that are open source tools, Facebook as well. There are new kinds of efforts. Once we start to develop partnerships that can make this happen and get high quality speech data, then that transformation is really possible. So thanks to folks, there are some people who took photos, Cynthia, John Hansen, and Abhijit Sangwan from UT Dallas provided some of the graphics there. And there is a little bit of work that's going on in this. Again, Cynthia is one of the few, a couple others, but not enough. So I'm encouraging folks who are interested to think more about that.